Good morning, Chairman. You need to put your microphone on, Chairman.
Good morning and welcome to the first virtual meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Rob Kendrick and I'm the Chairman of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to all members and officers in attendance today, and the audio feed of this meeting is being broadcast via the County Council's website. And I'd also like to welcome members of the press and public who are listening to our meeting online today. When invited to speak, you should unmute your microphone and switch on your camera. Please turn off your camera and microphone when not participating in the meeting, please. If you wish to speak, please use the chat function and type "speak" as a comment. All officers and members are welcome to use the chat function. Requests to speak will be collated by my Vice Chairman, Councillor Alexander Morn. Senior Scrutiny Officer will indicate in the chat when a new item has begun. If you do experience any IT issues during the meeting, please end the call using the red phone icon and rejoin the meeting using the link previously provided. If you do experience any connectivity issues when speaking, please turn your camera off as this may help. If you continue to experience IT issues, please contact David Hare, Member Services Manager, for assistance. Can I also ask that members who are intending to leave the meeting or are returning to the meeting indicate using the chat function? However, officers do not need to do so. We'll move on to the order of proceedings for today. Can I ask Tina Cope, Senior Democratic Services Officer, to confirm the presence of all members and officers in attendance at the meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. Could I please ask you to confirm your presence when your name is called? Councillor Rob Kendrick.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander Vaughan.
Present.
Councillor Matt Bowles.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Wendy Bokitt.
Present.
Councillor Rob Fuchs.
Present.
Councillor Colin Matthews.
Present. Hello.
Hello. Councillor Sarah Parkin.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Whittington.
Present.
Councillor Linda Wotton.
Present.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
Present.
Thank you. Reverend Philip Johnson.
Present.
Mrs. Megan Machin.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor David Brailsford. Councillor David Brailsford, I haven't actually seen him come in yet. He may come in later. Okay, I'd just like to advise you that we have the following officers here present today. We have Heather Sandy, Executive Director of Children's Services, Matthew Clayton, Interim Head of Education Support, Ross Cordy, Interim Assistant Director of Pandemic Response, Sheridan Dodsworth, Head of Special Educational Needs and Disability, Charlotte Gray, Acting Head of Service Children's Strategic Commissioning, Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, Joe Kavanagh, Assistant Director Early Help, Terry Marshall, Education Transport Manager, Eileen McMurrow, Senior Project Officer, Special Schools Project, Dave Pennington, Head of Property Development, Mark Rainey, Commissioning Manager Commercial, Anita Ruffle, Head of Transport Services, Sally Savage, Assistant Director Children's Commissioning, Martin Smith, Interim Assistant Director Education, and Janice Spencer is from Council Mrs. Patricia Bradwell, Executive Council for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services.
I've lost sound.
Did you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now. Sorry, I'd lost sound for a second there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Trina. Item 2, declarations of councillors' interests. If any member who would like to declare an interest, can you please indicate in the chat now by typing speak? So please type speak if you wish to declare an interest.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm having trouble with my chat function. Yes, I've got an adopted son who's in receipt of services from the Nardo service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Whitten. Councillor Morn, do we have any other members who'd like to declare an interest?
Chairman, there are no other members who wish to declare an interest.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 3, which is minutes of the meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee held on the 6th of March this year. My goodness, that seems an awful long time ago, doesn't it? This item is to confirm and sign the minutes of the last meeting of the committee on that date as a correct record. Do I have a proposer and seconder on the minutes?
I'll propose and Robert Fowkes.
I'll second them, Councillor Wendy Burkett.
Thank you both. We'll now vote on the minutes. Now, obviously, we had to follow the procedure on this. You're voting on whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. Trina Cope will call out the name of each member present in alphabetical order, and you're asked to state for, against, or abstain. Over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so here we go. So we'll start with Councillor Matt Bowles.
Abstain.
Abstain. Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs. Wendy Burkett.
For.
Matthew Friday's not here. Councillor Rob Fuchs.
For.
Councillor Rob Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Colin Matthews. Councillor Matthews.
I noticed.
It's like Councillor Matthews just left.
Okay. Councillor Alexander Moore.
For.
Councillor Sarah Parkin.
For.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
For.
Councillor Linda Wotton.
For.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
For.
Reverend Philip Johnson.
For.
And Mrs. Megan Matchin.
For.
Okay, then, Chairman, that's 10 for and 1 abstain. And obviously, we haven't got a vote from Councillor Matthews at this moment in time. So that's carried.
Thank you very much. That's the minutes agreed. We move on to item 4 now, which are announcements by myself, Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services, and our chief officers. So I'll start off with this. Today's meeting is actually the last meeting for Sally Savage, Assistant Director of the Children's Commission, who will be retiring in September. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank Sally for all the support and contributions to the committee over the past 6 years, and wish her a wonderful retirement. And I sincerely mean that. I do hope you have a great retirement. I can heartily recommend retirement. Anyway, do we have any executive councillor announcements from Councillor David Brailsford on behalf of Mrs. Bradwell, Councillor Mrs. Bradwell? Is Councillor Brailsford with us at the present?
I don't think he is, Chairman.
We'll have to move on then.
Rob, it's Robert Fowkes here. I did speak to David yesterday, and he said, "Oh, I'll see you tomorrow at the scrutiny meeting." So I guess he's not online because of some technical hitch.
That is always the risk we run with these meetings, Councillor Fowkes. Yes, I can appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. Are there any chief officers' announcements?
Okay, good morning, Chairman. Can I just echo your thanks to Sally Savage? Absolutely, over the last 6 years, she's been an integral part of our leadership team. But particularly, I think during the pandemic, Sally was due to retire several months ago, and stayed on to support us through that. And she's been an incredible support to Children's Services through this time. So thank you for acknowledging her, and can I add my thanks to yours?
Thank you very much, Heather. And if those acknowledgements could be noted, please, in the minutes, I would be grateful for that. Thank you very much. If we have no further comments from chief officers, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda. And this is the expansion of the Willoughby Academy Bourne. Now, this item is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the leader of the council between the 6th and 7th of August. I'd like to invite Dave Pennington, Head of Property Development, to present the report. We also have Kevin Kendall, Assistant Director, Corporate Property, Sheridan Dodsworth, Head of Special Education Needs and Disability, and Eileen Morrow, Senior Project Officer, Special Schools Project, in attendance to help answer any questions. Again, if I could remind members, if you'd like to speak, if you'd please type speak in the chat column, and Councillor Moore will monitor this. So over to you, Dave, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully this is working. There we go. Just need to give my apologies on behalf of Kevin Kendall, who for some unforeseen reasons couldn't make it this morning. But I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Sheridan, Head of SEND, just to provide an introduction to the paper, and then I'll pick up to talk about the property side of things. So over to you first, Sheridan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I just wanted to give a very brief introduction to the paper before Dave goes into some detail. Really just to remind members that this paper relates to the wider building communities of specialist provision strategy, which Scrutiny considered in October 2018 and unanimously supported the recommendation to the executive, who then approved the strategy in November 2018. And really just a reminder that the strategy supports the expansion of special schools in Lincolnshire, with the aim of ensuring that young people who have special educational needs and disability are able to attend education that's suitable for them at the right time, in the right place, and close to Willoughby, the overgram capital programme, and Dave is going to talk through some of the information that is in that report, and he's going to provide an appraisal of the scheme and recommendation for the procurement of the expansion to the school. So I just really want to sort of remind members of the actual overall strategy and the purpose of it, and this is an element of that. So back to Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheridan. I propose today, this morning, just to pick out the salient points from the paper. So I'm just going to work through, hopefully you've got the paper in front of you. I'm just going to work through the paper section by section and pick up a couple of points, and then happy to invite questions at the end of that. And assuming the technology works, I'll just invite, when I talk about the scope of the scheme, I'll invite Tracy to share a visual on your screens to show you what it looks like. So I'll turn straight to section 2, really. Section 1, Sheridan has sort of picked up on the strategy side of things. So section 2 of the paper, which is page 18, deals with the procurement. And I'll just make one comment around the procurement. How we're procuring the scheme is via a framework. And the benefit of allowing a framework is it is a process that is encouraged by the County Council through our procurement regulations. But the benefit of using a framework is it allows a contractor to be engaged very early in the process. So what that allows us to do is to help us to understand, mitigate and manage the risk inherent within a capital, and to then reach a solution that is appropriate to the site, but also consistent with the overall SEP. So that deals with section 2. I'm just going to move on to section 3, which is the scope of the works. And actually, Tracy, if you're able to put the visual up, this will help interpret what I'm about to say. So the Willoughby Academy in Bourne is being expanded by 64 places from 84 up to 148. Construction is due to start in September this year, with completion slated for August 2021. We'll be building a new 6-classroom block, which is what you can see on your screen in front of you. Technology's works, that's fantastic. Hall with specialist secondary teaching spaces in paragraph 3.3 details this, including science and technology, as well as group space and hygiene facilities. The existing school will undergo some remodelling work to provide therapy space and a medical inspection room to ensure the school can offer, in conjunction with health providers, a robust health offer to all children and young people that SEND in the local area. The car park will also be extended and remodelled to provide a suitable drop-off and pick-up space and further parking for increased staff numbers. So as you can see, the second image that you have in front of you is on the left-hand side. As you're looking at it, that's the existing part of the school. On the right-hand side is the new block, and you can see the car park sort of to your front and to your right. So hopefully those pictures help to interpret the scheme that we are discussing this morning. I'll just move on to section 4. So that describes the scope. So there's two distinct elements. There's a new block, and then we're also remodelling an existing part of the school. The project budget, you can see the detail there in front of you. It's in the paper on page 19 in section 4. But the bottom line, the gross budget for the scheme is 6.51 million. Section 5, value for money, is just worth stating this as this is taxpayers' money. And working with our colleagues in Kier, we do undertake a stringent and rigorous process to challenge ourselves and the contractor during the workup of the design, during the workup of the tendering of this scheme, to ensure that the scheme is value for money for the taxpayer while still meeting all needs provision in Bourne for Willoughby Academy. There are two distinct elements to this project. There's the new build and there's the remodelling. And we have available to us as property professionals what's known as the BCIS indices, which is a national benchmarking database, effectively, that allows us to plug into that database different types of construction. And what it does is it benchmarks those against nationally similar types of schemes. What that does is that gives us a framework to understand whether what we're building on a cost per square metre basis is in the right ballpark. And as you can see from section 5.4 in the paper, what we do is we've benchmarked the new build section, which on the screen in front of you is the right-hand side, and we've also benchmarked the remodelling section. And what this does is this allows us to understand whether we're delivering value for money by this criteria. What we've done is we've benchmarked this scheme, and for the new build section, there's a cost of £3,571 per square metre, which how that compares with schemes of a similar type across the country. The average cost is can be anything up to £4,444 a square metre. So what we're doing is we know that this scheme is value for money because we are certainly within the correct range for delivering these kind of schemes on a cost per square metre basis. And actually in paragraph 5.5, you'll see that we're £873 per square metre lower than the national average. Similarly, for the remodelling element of this scheme, the benchmark is £2,374 a square metre, with benchmark at £1,257 a square metre. I wouldn't want the committee to assume that just because we are below the average, the upper median, that we have cut corners, that we are delivering a scheme which isn't right or fit for purpose. That wouldn't be the right thing. And actually what I will do is I'll describe in this next section, section 3, how the design approval process goes through, and you can see actually how we're delivering something that is right for Lincolnshire, right as part of the strategy, and right for children, and delivering all needs as part of this SEND strategy. So as with Boston Endeavour, which was delivered at which is on site now and was scrutinised at the start of the year, this scheme is very much these schemes are very much worked up as part of a programme in collaboration with Children's Services, in collaboration with all the head teachers, delivering that are appropriate to these schemes. We use in paragraph 6.1 describes how we use Department for Education guidance to help determine what's known as a schedule of accommodation. That is kind of our building block and the foundation on which we design all of these schemes. Working with head teachers, working with Children's Services, we have used Department for Education guidance documents. We've derogated against that guidance documents with agreement with head teachers. And what that's allowed us to, the summary of that whole process, working with head teachers, working with Children's Services, means that we've arrived at a fit that is right for Lincolnshire, that's still within DFE guidance, that still meets all needs. But it has allowed us to be intelligent about where we target, where we are able to make efficiencies which not to the detriment of delivery of educational outcomes. And what that means, for example, is that we have, moving on to section 7, what that means is that we have allowed, paragraph 7.2 is an example of this process. So the DFE guidance says that you should have 3 different types of classroom, which are for profound and multiple learning difficulties, or PMLD, a classroom type for moderate learning difficulties, or MLD, and a classroom type for autistic spectrum disorder, or ASD. Well, actually, in collaboration, in discussion with Children's Services, in discussion with the head teachers who are living and breathing these schools on a day-to-day basis, we have agreed as a collective that actually, rather than delivering 3 different types of classroom space, which are all subtly different sizes, which from a construction perspective are all more difficult to build, we've agreed to amalgamate those 3 different classroom types into 2 different classroom types. And what this means is that it's technically, from a construction perspective, it's easier to build. That has allowed us to save money, but it's not to the detriment to educational outcomes in any way, shape or form. So I'm just using that as an example to demonstrate to the committee that we have been intelligent, we have been challenging backwards and forwards in terms of delivering the right thing for Lincolnshire, for Bourne, for the SEND programme, but equally we have challenged ourselves backwards and forwards on that. I will just then move on to section. There's a good amount of detail. I'll invite any questions on that within that section, but that summarises the process. I just want to finish my presentation just by describing, obviously, the impact of COVID and potentially Brexit, because I imagine that will be a concern to some at this moment in time. The construction industry is undergoing has experienced profound impacts as a result of COVID. Social distancing, for example, has meant that we've had to increase the number of welfare facilities on site. We haven't stopped construction by any stretch. Boston Endeavour, for example, we've only lost 2 weeks as a result of COVID. Having said that, contractors are pricing in a certain amount of risk in their contracts as a result of COVID. And what we've done as part of building the budget, we have allowed an amount of money of risk to deal with COVID and other factors as well. COVID, what that has meant for us at the moment is that there is some disruption in the supply chains and there is some cost increase that we're seeing. We have had to make a reasonable judgment as to what that means for this project, because I think you would all agree with me, it would be impossible to foresee in 6 months' time where we might be. My hope would be that there wouldn't be a second wave, or if there is a second wave, that it's managed by local lockdowns. And that's the kind of basis on which we've had to make a reasonable judgment around the level of risk within this project. I feel reasonably content that we've made that correct judgment. But what I do need to say to the committee is Brexit is on the horizon in January. If COVID-19 were to come back at the worst end of our expectation.
I'd like now to invite members of the committee to comment on the report. Councillor Morn, do you have any members who have indicated they'd like to speak?
Yes, we do, Chairman. Councillor Parkin, Councillor Folkes and Councillor Whittington have all indicated that they would like to speak.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Councillor Parkin.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thanks for that, thorough update and report, Dave. It did actually kind of reassure me in terms of it being at the lower end of the price scheme. That was my overriding concern as to, the rationale behind that and whether we had got approval and that security that we were still meeting need. I think my concern about that, furthermore, is this future-proof enough? Because obviously, I am confident that we are meeting need of the young people in the area now. But what do we know? What intelligence do we have about what the need is going to be in the short and medium term? And are we able to make adaptations and changes? Is there flexibility in the plans that we have now to be able to accommodate those in the future?
Yeah, thank you for that. In terms of the flexibility of the property, obviously it is designed to meet all needs for 148 pupils. And we have worked with head teachers in the design process so that, and in fact, amalgamating those 3 different classroom types into 2 is a demonstration of how those classrooms are incredibly flexible and can cater for different types of needs. With regards to sort of the future demand for SEND, I don't mind if I just invite Sheridan to answer that from a kind of a strategic perspective. But the property itself, once it's finished, is inherently a flexible building that does allow different types of provision to be met from it within that overall arch of all needs. Sheridan, do you want to say anything about the longer term aspect?
I'm happy to, but I noticed that Heather had come in, so I didn't know whether Heather wants to go first.
Thanks, Sheridan. Yeah. So I think that's a really complex question, Councillor Parkin, in terms of future-proofing it, because I think the future-proofing it's not just about the buildings, as you'll know, and as we've talked about a lot, it's about future-proofing the system and making sure that as many children are supported to thrive within their mainstream settings as possible, so that we protect the specialist placements for those who absolutely need them. We are leading a really significant project around our high needs system, and we've got a stakeholder group with head teachers who are part of that, and we met yesterday, and we're really starting to get that programme to a point where we can bring it to scrutiny committee, so that can be proposed and scrutinised, and it's a really exciting opportunity, and one I'm sure you'll be really pleased to see. In terms of the numbers, the programme is future-proofed in terms of numbers going forward, so it does allow for an uplift within a reasonable timescale that you would expect within the programme. And also what this does, as you'll know from the other conversations we've had, it's future-proofed in terms of the complexity of need we're seeing coming through. And if you remember, some of the issues were around some of our young people thriving with really complex needs and some amazing equipment that support them to thrive. But the equipment's actually quite large. And so once you've got several children with those large pieces of equipment, you need to change the design of the school. So we are also future-proofed around the complexity. So I think, yes, around the numbers, the system needs to continue to be transformed, and we need to continue to do that. And that's a national challenge as well as a Lincolnshire challenge. And I sit as part of a national group considering that. And then in terms of the complexity of young people, absolutely, it's future-proofed, and these will be really fantastic provisions when we've delivered them. I think Dave's highlighted the future-proofing of the capital programme in the light of COVID is something we're going to have to continue to review. So we know, and you will have heard, that costs are increasing, and some of that's really hard to tell at the moment about what are the future impacts of COVID-19 going to be on capital expenditures. But again, that's now subject to a review that we'll be bringing about the whole programme and what the impact of COVID-19 has been on it. What we can't afford to do is wait for that review to do this work. Otherwise, this scheme will cost a lot more money because we won't be able to implement it in the summer. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fuchs, please. Councillor Fuchs.
Yeah, right, Rob. Thanks very much. First of all, I just want to say I support the recommendations. And then as far as comments go, can you hear me all right?
Yes, indeed.
As far as comments go, it's just to pick up, really extending what Sarah was saying on the risk. And in para 8, you go on about the risk due to COVID, all about the capital spend. But my comment is that it'd be good to consider the design of the building altogether and whatnot for a subsequent or future outbreak of, like the one we're having now. So not a capital risk of COVID, but a future COVID and how the school would operate. So as we're now going to redesign it and add bits on and whatnot, it'd be a good idea to sort of think, well, if we had another pandemic, what would be a good way to sort of future-proof the school from that point of view? So in the same way, for example, they're building that new bypass at Lincoln, past Lincoln, which is a dual carriageway. But they're building the bridges in such a way to allow a dual carriageway rather than single carriageway. So they're planning for the future. So the same kind of analogy for the school. And the second comment is the new block looks great, and those graphics are really good, but it shows a flat roof. So what about having a roof garden on the top? And in para 6.3 on sensory gardens, it's worth remembering that over at the Haven in Boston, Teresa, the manageress there, is a real expert on this stuff. And they've got a really good sensory garden at the Haven. And I'm sure the staff at Willoughby could ask the people at the Haven for advice on how to do it, because they work with special needs kids as well. So that's it. Thank you very much. A very good presentation as well by David Pennington. Thank you very much.
Heather, did you want to come in on this at all? Or?
Yeah, just to provide the assurance that actually what we've got is our schools are all having to plan for local lockdowns at the minute. So just to provide some reassurance to the committee that they have those plans in place. They're hoping they don't have to use them, obviously, but they do have the plans in place and they're able to move in and out of lockdown should that be required.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whittington.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, thanks for the report. I think it's a very, very good report. I'm happy to support the recommendations. I've got a few comments that I think might be useful to bear in mind when this is actually taken to the executive. Because as you're aware, I'm Councillor Hill's support councillor for finance, and I know in response to a couple of the previous projects under this scheme, Councillor Hill's had a word with me around the finances. When we so just a few points. They're not criticisms. They're just things that I think the report, if they were added or a bit more explanation, would potentially result in less questions from the executive. When we talk about the ECIS comparison, perhaps if a little bit of narrative in the report to actually indicate that this is the national benchmark, just to provide a little bit of context around it, I think that would be quite useful, because I suspect that, because as I know the Council Hill in particular, we're very interested in the value for money aspect for this. So if we are making a comparison to a benchmark, it might be quite useful to actually add something about the benchmark, what it is, where it comes from in there. And in terms of the overall cost, I'm pleased to see obviously there's an element in there for a risk. But obviously, as has been explained during the presentation, there is a potential for a cost overrun due to potentially COVID and maybe Brexit. And I see that it's being funded, the project in total is being funded by a mixture. There's the basic need allocation, the Department of Education SEND grant, and the capital maintenance grant. And whilst I appreciate that there's going to be a report coming in the future around the potential impact of COVID on the programme in its entirety, I'm almost certain that this point will be picked up in particular by the executive. So I think there probably would need to be, just to make you aware that I'm sure that if you talk about that there will be a potential cost overrun, but potential that just to be prepared for that. And I'm guessing that the basic need, and I'm guessing, well, just a question really, if there is a cost overrun, what would be the source? Where would the funding come from for that? And my final point is, as you're probably aware at the moment, within the Trust, there's a capital monitoring group of senior managers that's been established to look at capital projects. And would this go to that, or is it excluded because it specifically relates to education? So just a few general points around that, which I think would provide some clarity for the executive at the meeting. But apart from that, I understand. I appreciate the value for money, and it is a good scheme. But in the past, Councillor Hill has asked me the questions that I'm now asking you, if that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Whittington. Heather, did you want to come back on that, or was it?
Yeah, so I think Dave and I will do a bit of a double act on this, because there was some technical property questions in there, and then some funding questions as well. So in terms of the funding challenge and the level of information, the review I've referred to of the whole scheme, Councillor Hill is aware that that's taken place. So you're absolutely right. We will query that and we'll need to look at that. In terms of where the funding for that scheme will come from, as again you've referred, there's a series of funding streams that are feeding into this programme. And that's because this programme's bringing benefits to a range of resources. So if I look at the cost of, if I placed all of these children in an out-of-county special school place and transported them, the cost would be met by the council and the schools block. So there would be a hit to both of those. So I agree with what Councillor Whittington said about the value for money still being really important. Actually, if we don't build these places, children will get a poorer deal because they'll have to travel a long way, but also we'll be paying an awful lot more money for that. So I think that's really important to emphasise. The funding will continue to come from that range of resources, and those grants are issued every year. So we've just had our basic needs grants issued very recently. And also Schools Forum agreed to the capitalisation of some monies to support this at the end of last year. So we'll continue to work through that and look at the programme overall as we move forward. But I absolutely expect to get that challenge as well when this paper comes to executive. And we're confident that we can review that over the period of time that we've got. In terms of the technical ones, I'm looking to Dave to support me with those.
That's fine. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Councillor Whittington, for your comments on the paper. Thing about the BCIS, we will, for future reports, because obviously there will be further schemes coming through, we will add a bit more narrative around that. And certainly can explain a bit more in presentation around that. And really, it's just to give you a bit of confidence as a committee, really, that actually with Keir and our technical partners and the expertise that we employ, we are able to tap into resources and benchmarking data, which allows us to understand that we are, within the right ballpark. So, but absolutely take your report, and we'll expand on that in future. Take your comments rather, and we'll expand on that in future reports.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Morn, do we have any further speakers indicated?
Sorry, Chairman. Can I also realise I didn't answer one question about whether it would go to the officer group. Going forward, these will all go to the officer group. The education as well as the corporate capital programme will all be going there. The problem is these are the programmes that are caught between the two different systems, which is why they've ended up coming here for that scrutiny.
Thank you for the clarification, Heather. Appreciate that. Councillor Morn, do we have anybody else who wishes to speak?
No, Chairman. No other members wish to speak.
Thank you. I just have one question, if I may. It's regards to the design of the school. I noticed on page 19, 3.4, there's reference to a medical inspection room being included. Is this, forgive my ignorance on this, is this the norm, or is this an innovation for this particular project?
Chairman, I can answer that question. So this is an innovation for this project. What we're very aware of, as we've talked about, these children have increasingly complex needs, and the need for health professionals to come and work with them is really important. What we see in lots of our independent providers is that they are able to advertise to parents that all of those services are available on site, whereas some of the children in our schools having to do a lot of travelling to get to those appointments. So we've worked with our partners in health and looked at what would we need to make sure that we wrap those health services around the school, and this is building in capacity for that. It's a really positive step, and it means we're going to be able to meet the health needs of children within their school setting. In lots of cases, obviously not all, but in lots of cases, and that will be really positive in terms of working together to give a holistic experience.
That's another plus point for the project. I think we need to note. I think that's very, very significant. Thank you very much for that. If that's all the speakers that we have, then I'd just like to say that the committee is invited to firstly consider the report in Appendix 1 and determine whether the committee supports the recommendations of the Leader of the Council as set out in the report, and 2, agree any additional comments to be passed to the Leader of the Council in relation to this item. The recommendations to the Leader of the Council on page 15 are as follows: that the Leader of the Council approves the scheme appraisal for carrying out works for the expansion and remodelling of Willoughby Academy Bourne. And secondly, approves the council entering into a construction contract for the said works with Wilmot Dixon Construction via the SCAPE National Framework. Now, the comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, to be passed on to the Leader of the Council. And I move that we support these recommendations. Can I have a seconder, please?
Rob,
yes,
I'll second them if you like, Mark. Rob.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Folks, we'll now move to vote on this item. You are voting on whether you support the recommendations to the Leader of the Council and agree to provide the additional comments to the Leader. We'll have the usual roll call, as it were, for this. I'd just like to point out that as this item is an educational matter, the added members will be entitled to vote on this item. So, Trina, will you please read out the name of each member against present alphabetically, and again, you're asked to state for, against, or abstain. Over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, I'll read your names out in alphabetical order, members. Councillor Matt Bowles.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Wendy Bowkett.
For.
Councillor Rob Fuchs.
For.
Councillor Rob Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Colin Matthews.
For.
Councillor Alexander Morn.
For.
Councillor Sarah Parkin.
For.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
For.
Councillor Linda Wotton.
For, and an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
For.
Reverend Philip Johnson.
For.
And this is Megan Machin.
For.
That's unanimous then, Chairman. Everyone's in agreement.
Thank you very much. That's that conclusion of that item. I'd like to move on to item 6 now, and this is the proposal to discontinue the Ashville South Worsby School. It's a final decision. Just like to point out, this item is for a pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive Council of Adult Care, Health and Children's Services on the 31st of July. I'd like to invite Matthew Clayton, Interim Head of Education Support, to present this report. We also have Sally Savage, Director for Children's Commissioning, and Martin Smith, Interim Director for Education, in attendance to help answer any questions that you may have. Again, just a reminder, if you'd like to speak, please speak in the chat column, and Councillor Morn will obviously monitor this. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. As mentioned there, this is an Executive Councillor decision paper regarding the final decision on the future of Ashville School. I'll just give a quick overview of the proposal and some background to this before we lead on to discussion and questions. So the proposal is to close the Ashville South Worsby School with effect from the 1st of September this year. It's a school in South Worsby on the edge of Sleaford, and is classed as a social, emotional and mental health special school. So that's an SEMH school, but it's very specialist as it not only exists to provide an education to young people admitted, as it only exists to provide an education to young people admitted to the attached Ashville Hospital unit. And that's run by LPFT, which is the Lincolnshire Lincolnshire Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. They are an NHS organisation providing mental health and learning disability services for Lincolnshire and parts of the wider East Midlands area. So they are responsible for the unit, and we as the LA are responsible for the school that serves that unit. The school itself, which is operated separately by Lincolnshire County Council, it's a small facility with just 2 classrooms. It provides school places only to pupils at the hospital unit, as I've just said. So it's wholly dependent on the hospital unit itself to supply the school with those pupils. The school has an official capacity of just 13, that's 13, and caters for pupils aged 11 to 18. As mentioned in the report on page 35 of the document pack, the number on roll at the school has varied between 3 and 13 between 2016 and 2019. It's not unusual to have less than 10 on roll, and the majority of pupils accessing education at the school from the unit tend to be in years 11, 12 and 13, and were mostly from outside of Lincolnshire. There are currently no pupils on roll at the school. This is because the NHS hospital unit attached to the school has been closed since October 2019 due to the inability to attract the necessary consultant medical staff required to operate the facility whilst the new model was being piloted. The pilot is a care pilot run by LPFT through NHS England, where children and young people who may previously have been admitted to the Ash Villa Hospital unit will now, wherever possible, be treated in their own homes and educated within their current local school closer to the community in which they live. That pilot is running until October 2020. LPFT have confirmed, however, that the Ash Villa Hospital unit will not reopen on the current site in the current buildings, whatever the outcome of that pilot may be. The hospital unit buildings are apparently not fit for purpose and do not meet the new quality standards set by NHS England. So, as already mentioned, due to the situation, there are currently no pupils at the school. Therefore, no pupils would be displaced if the school were to close at this point, and it would have no impact on the local community as it does not provide local school places in the same sense that a normal school might. This is not like any other previous school closure that I've ever been involved in or that I'm aware of, where in other cases there might have been a reason for saying that the school is integral to the local community. That's not the case here. As mentioned, the majority of the pupils access the school from actually outside of the county, so the impact on the immediate community would be minimal. So with all this in mind, and at the request of the governing body, due to concern over the well-being of staff and the confirmation from LPFT that the hospital unit would not reopen in the long term, a 6-week consultation commenced on the 27th of January this year. That was to consult on the potential closure of the school. A wide range of interested parties were contacted directly and information shared via various media channels. As it is an LA maintained school, the LA are the responsible body for running the closure process and for making the final decision. As part of the consultation period that ran from January through to early March, a public consultation meeting was held on the 26th of February, but no one chose to attend other than the present LPFT and local authority staff. There's been very little interest in this proposal from both the public or the media. There were 4 responses received during the 6-week consultation period. They're summarised in Appendix A of the report. One of those responses was, well, no objection, providing that the LA was able to provide quality education to allow children to flourish in their local schools. The other 3 responses related mainly to the Ash Villa Hospital unit itself as opposed to the actual school, and raised questions for LPFT and NHS England to consider as part of their pilot, which is separate from this LA process in relation to the school. So with no objections to the closure of the school, on the 21st of April, the decision was taken to proceed to a public statutory notice. That was published, and we moved to the next formal stage of the closure process. On the 6th of May, statutory notice was published in the local press and on our website. That's shown in Appendix B, along with all the detail in the complete proposal. That's in Appendix C. That marked the start of the 4-week consultation period. That was a further period, an opportunity for people to put forward objections or views regarding the closure of the school. That 4-week period ended on the 3rd of June, and no responses were received. A final decision is now required on whether to close the school at the end of August this year. It's just mentioned that alternatives to closure have obviously been considered, and they're outlined in more detail in the report, but to not close the school would, however, result in a school continuing to remain open indefinitely with no pupils, with funding required, and with the staff continuing to be employed, and that's not considered to be an efficient use of resources, should I say, and would also have a further negative impact on the well-being of the staff employed at the school with no future secured. So the recommendation here is to support the proposal to the school, and I'll pass back to you, Chairman, and to committee members for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for that. I would like now to invite members of the committee to comment on the report. Councillor Vaughan, do you have any members who have indicated they'd like to speak?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Whittington and Councillor Folkes.
Oh, thank you very much. Councillor Whittington.
Sorry, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the report. I think it's one of these where, with reluctance, I'm going to have to support the recommendation. I just think it's sad that we've actually reached this situation. I'm very, very disappointed actually with the local NHS, because those of us who are involved in Grantham Hospital are aware that another NHS organisation has used this failure to recruit medical staff, and I just see it seems to be an issue across the health service. Whereas, for instance, in Lincolnshire County Council, we seem to have no problems at all in attracting some brilliant people to come and work for the County Council. And I'm just amazed that the NHS always seems to come up with this, well, I was going to say excuse, but this reason all the time. So I'm very, very disappointed with the NHS. My concern is just a bit of reassurance that obviously, potentially these are a very, very, very vulnerable cohort of young people with very, very specific, distinct needs, and just a little bit of reassurance, if possible, that the local schools will be able to have the ability and the resources to cater for the needs of these very vulnerable people, young people. What impact it might have on the local schools if extra funding is going to be available for them, and also if these young people are now being resident at home instead of in Ashville, what extra support is going to be there to support the families, because obviously I appreciate, and I know from various bits of casework and other sources, that it can be quite challenging for parents and schools to deal with these young people who have really, really special and specific needs. So just some assurance around that, if possible. And as I say, I don't think we've got any option other than to support it, but I'm really disappointed, Mr. Chairman, with the local health service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Whittington. If you want to come back, I see Heather also wishes to come on this one.
Have you got something?
I think probably it'd be really helpful to invite Sally Savage in, who can talk in a moment about the alternative model that's been piloted and the success we're seeing of that for these young people, because I think that will be reassuring for the committee. Also just want to highlight really what Matt said around it. These are very, very few Lincolnshire children. The impact on Lincolnshire schools is very, very small. These are often children from other areas being cared for and educated at this site. So just to again reassure the committee about the numbers, but I think Sally will be able to talk you through the alternative model and the early indications we're seeing from that.
Yes, hello everyone. So just to reiterate that the unit, when it was open, was what's known as a general adolescent unit, and therefore catered for a certain section of the children and young people who needed inpatient support. So it's essentially a certain group with very specific needs. There were always children and young people who needed to access other provision outside Lincolnshire, and that provision continues to be in place. So the numbers have traditionally been very small and over recent years, and that is in part due to the fact that the Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust were already offering some intensive home support to try and prevent children and young people going into hospital unless it's absolutely necessary. And essentially the new model is an extension of that. So they have recruited additional staff to provide a much higher level of intensive support to children and young people in their home. So that can include numerous visits per day if required, and a whole range of support and provision around those young people, and very much those staff taking the role of wrapping provision around those young people, including making sure that they're able to access education and other services as required. Early indications from the pilots, as people have said, it is a pilot and that is being monitored by NHS England, but early indications of that pilot is that it's been very successful, and that those children who would have previously gone to Ashville have been able to stay at home and have provided the intensive support required. And some of the comments from parents, particularly, and families have been very positive in terms of this range of provision. And that includes some, the parents and families of some children and young people who have previously been in Ash Villa, so they're sort of directly able to compare what the new service is. So I obviously that pilot is subject to NHS England approval going forward, but the early indications are that that is successful and that these children and young people's needs are being met. And just to say also, in terms of national evidence, the national evidence is that this kind of model of care does produce better outcomes for children and young people. Obviously, in Lincolnshire, it's too early to look at those outcomes because obviously those outcomes accrue over a longer time period. But we would be hopeful that not only is the care that's currently being provided of a very high quality, it will have a really positive impact on outcomes in the longer term.
Thank you. Councillor Fuchs.
Thanks, Rob. First of all, I'd like to say I support the recommendations. Secondly, that I fully agree with the comments by Councillor Mark Whittington on the NHS and all the stuff he said about that. When I read this, it gave me, I recollected that episode in Yes Minister where they have a hospital with no patients, and here we have a school with no pupils. But looking at a photo on Google Street View, I had no idea where this Rawsby place was, and it turns out it's up near Sleaford somewhere. And I had a look at it on your neck of the woods, Rob. And anyway, I looked on Google Photos, and there's a picture of this school, a sort of oldish-looking place, with quite a lot of cars in the car park, which then made me think about the poor old staff, you know, who are going to have to be redeployed. And I just like to say it's important that the council makes sure that they look after the staff, because these sort of staff who look after the special needs kids are really worth their weight in gold. And we must do everything we can to make sure they're redeployed successfully within the county of Lincolnshire. And thank you very much to Matthew for a very good presentation. That's it, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Folks. Who's responding to this one? Is it Matthew or is it Heather?
Heather can jump in if I miss something, but I was just going to talk about the staff element there. And we do have a redeployment policy in place to try and support staff as best as possible that are in this unfortunate situation. And as you say, we've got some excellent, really experienced staff with an excellent wide range of specialist skill set, which we wouldn't want to lose. So we will, and we have been working with them to find opportunities if they wish to engage in that process to try and redeploy them into other schools and facilities across the county if they wish to engage in that. So I just wanted to talk about that and just give you an overview of the redeployment process. I don't know if Heather's got anything to add.
No, I would absolutely support what Matt just said. The only thing I'll add is one of the difficulties about these virtual meetings for us as officers is knowing who's going to answer a question. Normally we can nod to each other and make eye contact. So I apologise. I'm jumping in and out to try and support that process. But Matt answered that fully, I think.
Thank you, Heather. I have a similar problem chairing it. I can't see who's nodding to say they want to say something. Thank you very much anyway. Councillor Morn, do we have any more speakers?
Chairman, no other speakers, but I just wanted to ask a quick question myself. Just on, obviously reading the paper, the proposals you're putting forward make complete sense. And I think part of this obviously comes down to finance as well, funding a school that's got no students. But the one thing I wanted to ask, on page 41, you've talked about the costs of winding up essentially, and how they'll be funded out of reserves. And I just wanted a bit more detail really on have you got an estimate for those winding up costs, and will there be surplus school reserves, and what happens to those as well after the school's been closed?
That is a very good question. I'll try my best to answer it. I mean, the school have a budget. They've got that budget to use up until the end of this year as it stands at the moment. As I understand it from our finance colleagues, that they can meet all of the costs within the allocated budget. If anything's left from that budget, it will go back into the central pot of funding for LCC schools through the high needs block and other funding. So as things stand, it won't take them over the budget that have been allocated.
Thank you. Councillor Morn, do we have any more speakers?
Thank you for that answer. And Chairman, no other speakers.
Thank you. I would just like to make one or two observations, if I may. You won't be surprised on this one, as I knew Ash Villa well when I worked for LPFT, and I knew some of the staff very well who were there, and obviously met many patients over the years there. I'd be very interested to see the report on the model when it comes out in October. I think that should be interesting. I don't know whether that'll be relevant to this committee, but from a personal point of view, I'd be interested in seeing that. Picking up on what Councillor Whittington was saying, and again, this is all anecdotal and I can't produce hard evidence for this, but I remember some time ago there was talk of actually building a new unit on the Longleys Road site in Lincoln a few years ago. I wonder whether that came to nothing because of the inability to recruit the necessary clinical staff, I think consultant level for it. But having spent 30 years in the NHS and seeing buildings being closed and then reopened and I wouldn't like to make a prediction, but you never know. In a few years' time, they may come up with the idea of building a new unit with a different purpose somewhere in Lincoln, but that's just by the by. If we move back to the agenda, we've now had all the speakers, and we are invited as a committee to, firstly, number one, consider the report in Appendix 1 and determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Leader of the Council as set out in the report, and two, agree any additional comments to be passed to the Leader of the Council in relation to this item. And the recommendations to the Leader of the Council on page 15 are as follows. Hang on, whoops, I've got behind on my wrong sheet here. So sorry, I do apologise. Yeah, so we're invited to consider the report in the Appendix 1, determine whether we support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services as set out in the report, and agree any additional comments to be passed to the Executive Councillor. And the recommendations to the Executive Councillor on page 32, again, I apologise for my error in the beginning, and are as follows: that the Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services approves the closure of Ash Villa South Orsby School from the 1st of September 2020. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy to be passed to the Executive Councillor. I move that that we support these recommendations. Could I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, I'll second them, Rob Fowkes.
Thank you, Councillor Fowkes. We will now move to a vote, and just as a reminder, you are voting on whether you support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor and agree to support the additional comments to the Executive Councillor. And this is an education matter. Again, adding members will be entitled to vote on this particular item. Trina, will you read out the name of each member present alphabetically? And again, people are asked to state whether they're for, against, or abstain. Over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll read you out in alphabetical order. Right, Councillor Matthew Bowles.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Wendy Bowkett.
For.
Councillor Fuchs.
For.
Councillor Rob Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Colin Matthews.
Councillor Matthews has had to leave the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Morn. Councillor Morn.
For.
Councillor Sarah Parkin.
For.
Mark Whittington.
For.
Councillor Linda Wotton.
For.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
For.
Is Reverend Philip Johnson still with us?
No, I'm afraid Reverend Philip Johnson has had to leave the meeting as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morn. And Mrs. Megan Matchin. Megan? Is Megan still there?
She hasn't indicated that she's not here, but perhaps we can assume so.
Okay, so from the votes carried so far, Chairman, that's unanimous, 9-4 for those members that are present.
Sorry, 4.
Oh, 10 then, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's one of the problems with the virtual meetings, isn't it? Apart from the chairman reading out the wrong piece. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 7 then, which is the sustainable modes of transport to school and SMOTE strategy. And this item is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive Councilor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services on the 31st of this month. I'd like to invite Mark Rainey, the Commissioning Manager, Commercial, to present the report. And we also have Charlotte Gray, Acting Head of Service, Children's Strategic Commissioning, and Terry Marshall, Education Transport Manager, in attendance to answer any queries. Again, just the usual reminder, if you'd like to speak, please type speak in the chat and Councillor Moore will monitor this. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. So I'm here to present and give a brief overview around the statutory duty the Council has under Section 508A of the 1996 Education Act with regards to promoting sustainable modes of travel to school and having a strategy in place for that particular purpose. Sustainable modes of travel to school are defined as those that improve either or both of the physical well-being of those that are using them, or the environmental well-being of the whole or part of a particular area. So we have appended a draft strategy which will replace the 2016 to 2019 strategy. That meets the requirements of the guidance in terms of giving an assessment of school travel needs within it, an audit of the sustainable travel infrastructure, the promotion of sustainable modes of travel to school, and a plan to try and develop the sustainable infrastructure in the longer term. The draft strategy does highlight some of the successes of the previous work over the last 3 to 4 years. That includes substantial amounts of training through Bikeability, education transport workshops delivered by the Max Respect team, the road safety education initiatives that have been undertaken, promoting access to Wheels to Work for young people looking to get to work, apprenticeships or college. School travel plans have been developed with several schools developing national accreditation. As a result of that, we've continued with independent travel training for those young people with special educational needs or may need some assistance to be able to walk in a sustainable or cycle in a sustainable way to school. We've also looked at trying to promote school safety zones around schools to try and encourage people to undertake sustainable modes of travel to their schools. The new strategy will look to build on those initiatives over the course of the next 3 years. In particular, we'll be trying to ensure the continued development of school travel plans with schools at a local level. And also, we've managed to secure £450,000 worth of capital monies through an investor save programme within the council to try and look at improving those unsuitable routes that might encourage people to get to school via more sustainable modes of travel than how they are currently accessing them. So as referenced earlier, what I should have said earlier on was that although the strategy, the responsibility for producing the strategy is undertaken by Children's Services, the delivery will rely on collaboration with other areas of the council. And as party to that, one of the things that will be looking to do will be to convene Sustainable Travel Group, which will draw upon the expertise of colleagues from across the council to help deliver the objectives and the aims that we've set ourselves. That will include participation of the Executive Support Councillor for Children's Services, and as and when we're looking to develop improvements at a local level that support sustainable modes of travel to school, we'll also be looking to co-opt the participation of members at a more local level. Within the new strategy, there are 3 objectives. As we mentioned earlier, trying to promote that collaborative working to improve the infrastructure, promoting healthy lifestyles for children and young people, and looking to meet the provisions of the 2006 Education Act in terms of our continued provision and entitlement of young people and children and young people to home to school transport. The 6 key actions within the strategy Primarily, one of the first things we want to do is the creation of the Sustainable Travel Group, which will include incorporating those colleagues across the council. Looking to identify link to school routes for development. That will include using any funding that might become available through the government's new Decarbonising Transport and setting the challenge plan, which I believe the council has already been able to access some funding related to that. Engaging with schools on school travel plan developments, continuing our Max Respect and independent travel trainer programmes, looking to reappraise any unsuitable routes that we might have to try and identify improvements that could be made to promote sustainable modes of travel to school. And that may include the use of capital funding, either that we've already accessed through the Investor Save or anything that might become available through further government funding. And continuing to work together with the Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership around ensuring safe travel to school for our children and young people. So I'd just like to invite comments from Scrutiny Committee before we take the draft strategy to the Executive Councillor to ask for sign-off to adopt that as the Council's Sustainable Modes of Travel to School Strategy 2020 through to 2023.
I'd now like to invite members of the committee to comment on this report. Councillor Morn, do we have any members who've indicated they'd like to speak?
Yes, we do, Chairman. Councillor Parkin, Councillor Whittington, Councillor Ray Wootton and Councillor Folkes.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Councillor Parkin.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for that, Mark. I think, we are living at a time now where COVID is really focusing minds. And I think it's really focusing minds on public health. And it's clear to see, in terms of the impact of COVID, how poor public health is impacting on outcomes for people. So the need for that healthier, preventative lifestyle, I think, has never been clearer in people's minds, and it's definitely at the forefront. I think the other thing that we have an opportunity for at the moment is to really discuss the green agenda in a new way. People are getting used to new ways of working and of being. And so I think that whole, there's a brilliant opportunity for those two things. And we know that two of the real plus points and the benefits of this transport sustainability is improved public health and a reduction in our carbon footprint if we do it right. However, it's clear from the strategy, and I really appreciated it being there, that funding for these schemes has been cut to the point that we are just using our own county resources for that. And I appreciate that we have done what we have with the financial and the human capacity that we've got. Do you think there is an opportunity now for increased spend in these areas so that we can look at this afresh and look at this with new eyes to really, really push this in a way that we just do not have the financial and the human capacity for now? Is there that appetite on a national level to really get to grips with these issues now?
I didn't know whether I just frozen there. No, okay, sorry. With regard to the national level, I suppose the what's been coming out recently around the Decarbonising Transport plan, I'm not sure that it's been termed a strategy, is talking about putting significant levels of funding into local authorities to try and promote more sustainable ways of transport in general, I think, not just around education transport. One of the things that we want to do through the Sustainable Travel Group is to try and make sure that we can be involved in those discussions with our colleagues in highways and planning in particular at as early a stage as possible to try and make sure that education transport is not, is an integral part of those discussions. And I think that's what we'll have to try and do, to look at trying to access funding from that viewpoint. Obviously, the council has also granted us £450,000 worth of monies through an Investor Save project, which we hope will go some way to improving a number of different routes where currently we may be having to put transport on, where the route itself may be unsuitable for children and young people to walk on. And we should be able to use that money, hopefully, to make those improvements and make some inroads into getting people to, I suppose, but both improve healthily, but also in terms of trying to remove that carbon footprint by not actually having to use the transport itself. I don't know. I can see Heather's on. I don't know whether you want to say anything more, Heather, about the national scenario.
Again, I think you've covered it really well, Mark. I think it's hard to know when to jump in on that. I think I would agree absolutely with Mark. There's a real commitment to considering this at the beginning of every scheme, really looking at how do we do this differently. And that hits lots of agendas, as Mark said. I think also the government announcement about funding for capital development has the potential to be significant for us. So we're waiting for details to come through on that. But already we've put a pitch in to say when those monies come through, actually some of it being focused towards this kind of development would be really key. The 450,000 Mark's referred to is really significant for us because, again, if we can start to do a couple of routes each year, you start to have that cumulative impact as well. So we're very clear which routes would deliver the most impact. So that we can focus on that and work really closely with corporate property colleagues in the development of that, and highways colleagues, sorry, not corporate property.
Thank you.
Rob, can I just come back with a small observation at the end?
Small one, yeah.
Yeah, I think then, I mean, obviously we've got this strategy. Is it 5 years? I can't remember the dates on it now. My other screen's turned off.
It's 3 years, Councillor Parkin.
3 years, thank you. Just let me get Monica on the other thing back up. What is clear is that there's going to be things happening that we could do with an update for in the interim. So is it possible for us to have updates on this, Councillor Kendrick, as we feel appropriate, so that we can see about the new monies? And I don't know whether it needs to come back to us maybe this time next year for an update as to what's happened in that 12-month period with those new monies and those new routes being on stream.
I think it'd be interesting to have an update perhaps in the future on how the routes are going. As Heather said, they're going to be focused on. I think that sounds a good idea. I don't know what Heather's view on this might be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. No problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, is that all, Councillor Parkin? Yes?
Yeah, I was just saying thank you.
Thank you. There's problems with virtual meetings, isn't it? You can't see across the room. Councillor Whittington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very good report. Really enjoyed reading it. Find myself in total agreement with the comments that Councillor Parkin has just made. Regarding, encouraging, especially young people to get into good habits from early on, and but in terms of cycling and walking and stuff like that. And obviously, it does have an impact on reducing carbon footprint as well. But I think for me, it's the work to make sure that if we are encouraging children, young people to cycle or walk to school with their parents, that we actually do make sure it's nice and safe for them to do that. Now, obviously, during the early stages of the COVID-19, there was a dramatic reduction in the amount of traffic on the roads for obvious reasons, but obviously that level is now starting to pick up again. I'm not sure if it's back to the levels it was pre-lockdown. I suspect, but again, I've got no evidence that potentially in the future that there could be, with more people working from home, there could be less traffic on the road. But I think it's really important, because certainly this has encouraged me, with there being less traffic, to dig my old bike out the back of the garage, which hasn't been used in about 10 years. Because you just feel safer if there's less traffic around. I was going to ask about the money that the government is making available for the decarbonisation of transport strategy, because I know that is designed to encourage highway authorities to put in cycle lanes, to sort out junctions, to make it pedestrian and cycle friendly. So I think it would be useful to get an update in the future on what we've received and how it's being spent. And I take Mark Rainey's comments about we need to work with the Highways Department around this. Happy yet the referred to the £450 Invest to Save that we've made available to start to improve some of these routes, which again I think is really important. So I'm really happy with this report. Happy to support it. My question is, it's a rather long preamble, but is I noticed that 12,000 children have sort of been given cycle training so far as part of the Bikeability scheme. Now I remember, I think some of the more mature members of the committee and probably officers will remember when they were at school doing the cycle proficiency. It was part of what happened at school, and we used to go out on our bikes, and it was in the days when we didn't even have high-vis vests, or helmets. We just went out on our bikes to be taught the rudiments of road safety. So I'm just wondering if as part of if funding is available, some could be put in towards maybe expanding that side of it, because obviously, I guess younger children will probably be going to school under the supervision of their parents. But I'm thinking about children once they get to an age when they can maybe cycle themselves, to kind of give them the confidence that they can handle the road conditions, and also to make them aware of potential dangers and things like that. So that's the question, but really supportive of this strategy. And it'd be great to get an update in the future as to how the money's being spent and what funding is going to be available from central government, and how it's being used as part of the overall decarbonisation of transport. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Whittington. Mark, did you want to come back on a question in particular?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we'll always have a look at where there may be any funding available for particular initiatives. I mean, I suppose what we'd have to have a look at in detail is whether or not, as part of the government's plan, that will extend to schemes like Bikeability and or what used to be cycling proficiency, or whether it is focused on, I suppose, what you may call the infrastructure to support that in terms of highways, roads, and their upgrade. But yeah, certainly as part of the Sustainable Travel Group, I think that's something that we can try and have a look at, and obviously report back on a periodic basis into scrutiny.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Ray Wotton next. Councillor Ray Wotton.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. I've read the report the best I can and approved with the report, but I couldn't find in there any way that we can actually physically stop those parents who continually take their children to school, even though they live close, and block the traffic in the morning. I live on the 607 in Grantham. We have 10,500 vehicles a day going down this road, and with the Priory Ruskin Academy and the National School, they continually chock up traffic in the morning. So is there any way we can physically deter or stop parents from taking their children to school by putting restrictions outside schools? Thank you.
Mark?
I don't know whether one of my colleagues in
Heather's coming in, I think.
I don't know whether any of my colleagues in highways, such as Anita, might be able to help us, because I'm not sure that's within scope or within our capability to be able to do that. I know we do have several initiatives where we're actually trying to look at trying to remove parents from actually parking very close to schools in terms of the school safety zones, and also what you make the park and stride sites. One of which I think is shown as a case study within the draft strategy. But I don't know whether Anita or Heather want to talk more about the legalities of other ways of closing roads off. Or
Anita, I'll come to you first.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, it is possible. There's a fine balance, because obviously if we look to try and close roads off to vehicular traffic, then what that does do is actually mean that we can't get the school buses there, because I'm afraid it's a one size fits all. It's no vehicles or so. But yes, it is possible. We certainly look to have school travel zones where we are, taking down the speed outside, we try and put local measures in. So the simple answer is yes, it's possible, but it would be done on a case-by-case basis, and we'd have to look at what other measures might need to be put in place as a consequence of that.
Chairman, can I come back, please?
Okay, Councillor Wootton.
Yes, the only reason I raise it is that if it's not mandatory, then if people are lazy, they will just continue to take the children to school unless they can't do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the other thing I was going to say that we do, and which does have some impact when we look at it, is if schools lead that work. So if schools lead that work with their children and with their parents, then we get better impact if it's driven through the school. So one of the things we do is work with the Road Safety Partnership and to drive that work through schools to emphasise the risk. But I do understand Councillor Wootton's point around the lack of controls we have in place to prevent some of this. I think they're really valid points. And I know in some areas it causes significant challenges.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Heather. I've got Councillor Rob Fuchs next.
Thanks, Rob. First of all, I support the recommendations. A very good report, Mark. But I have a technical question for you, which is that just over the frontier here in Stamford into Rutland is Casterton Community College. And an awful lot of Stamford kids go there, and they walk as well, which is good. But is Casterton College, despite being over the frontier, going to be included within your travel plan thing?
It's a good question, and not one that I think we've probably given too much consideration to. Obviously, we're always looking at trying to make sure that as much as possible it is a sustainable mode of travel to school. My colleague Terry Marshall, who looks after education transport, that's come on screen, will know a lot more about some of the out-of-county schools that we work with and what we might put in place. So I don't know whether, Terry, you want to give a response to Councillor Folks on that one?
Yeah, I was just going to come in and say that we have a number of children, Lincolnshire students, that do attend Casterton College, where we provide transport for them. So I think the remit of the strategy is our Lincolnshire residents. So it covers all of the children wherever they might be going, whether that's in county or out county. So it would certainly be something that's on our radar when we're looking at these schemes.
Great, thanks, Terry.
Thank you very much. Do you have any other speakers?
No other speakers, Chairman, but I wanted to ask a question myself as well. I was just amazed to see that in the report, 76% of residents or students live within cycling distance of a school within 30 minutes. And it sort of made me think, if we were very sort of revolutionary with this, if we ploughed millions of pounds into buying every single one of those students a push bike and installed bike shelters in schools instead of bus parks and other things, you could see real transformational results. And I just wondered, have you ever looked at the cost of doing that? £27 million is the annual home to school transport budget, and I'm sure a big slice of that could be used to get a lot more people cycling to school if we were prepared to put the infrastructure in place.
Policy decision rather than
sorry, yeah.
It's certainly something to consider. I suppose within that there will be a large proportion that probably won't be entitled to school transport in any particular case, so that they probably wouldn't be accessing it. But I don't know if you want to talk further, Heather.
I think
of that.
Yeah, I think, in terms of proposals like that, they're clearly political proposals and not one officers could take forward. Sounds very exciting, though.
Thank you, Heather. Well said. To conclude on this, the one thing that struck me from reading the report, if I remember correctly, and it was a shocking figure, actually, as regards obesity levels. I think it was 4 and 5 year olds, roughly about 25% indicated they were either overweight or obese, and about up to 34% for I think it was year 6. I can't remember which year group it was, but it was the older year group. And I think anything that can help combat this is to be welcomed, really. It is a shocking figure. I know exercise is not the be-all and end-all as regards weight loss, but I think that anything that can be done to help that would be good. Anyway, if we come back to the agenda, this committee is invited to...
Sorry, Chairman, we've got one more speaker. Councillor Linda Wootton has indicated she'd like to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Morn. Linda Wootton, please. Linda? Councillor Linda Wootton?
That's it.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry I was a bit late there. It's something that Heather commented on, made me spring into action, because I think some of these things do actually come from the schools themselves. And often when we're popping into town first thing in the morning, it always makes me smile, and it's such a lovely sight is to see the toddlers in what I call the walking train. And I think it's so wonderful where they've come down the street and picked up other members, and that's a wonderful sight to see. And also regarding the obesity, I think I've spoken to you about this before. One of our little schools, Little Gonnaby School, we've got a cracking cook there, Marie. I'm hoping she's still there. And she does this wonderful thing where she invites, because we've got quite a few immigrant children, and she invites the parents along, or sometimes it's the grandparents, and she cooks a meal. And she actually gives out the menus and things like that. So I think they're addressing a couple of things there. So some of these things do actually come from the schools themselves, and I think it's a really good thing. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry to have been late there.
No problem, Linda. We all have problems with the technology, I think, from time to time. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm sure good practice is shared, and if not, I hope it will be good. It will be shared as regards initiatives such as that. Anyway, if there's no further speakers, I'll go back to the agenda item as such and just recap on this. We're invited to consider the report in Appendix 1 and determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services as set out in the report. And secondly, we agree any additional comments to be passed to the Executive Councillor in relation to this item. The recommendations to the Executive Councillor are on page 57 and are as follows: that the Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services 1 approves the draft Sustainable Modes of Transport to School Strategy 2020 to 2023 attached to Appendix A as the Council's Sustainable Modes of Transport to School Strategy 2020 to 23, and 2 delegates to the Executive Director for Children's Services, in consultation with the Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services, authority to take all decisions necessary to ensure the delivery of this strategy. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy to be passed on to the Executive Councillor. I move that we support these recommendations. Can I please have a seconder? Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that, Rob.
Oh, is that Councillor Whittington?
It is, yes, Rob.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Whittington. Thank you very much. We'll now vote on this item, and you're voting, of course, whether you support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor and agree to provide the additional comments to the Executive Councillor. As this item is an education matter, the added members will be entitled to vote on this item. And once again, Trina will read out the name of each member present alphabetically, and you're asked to state for, against, or abstain. Over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, we'll start with Councillor Matt Bowles.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Wendy Bokit. Councillor Mrs. Wendy.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself there.
Oh, bless you. Oh, thank you. Councillor Rob Fuchs.
For.
Councillor Rob Kendrick.
For.
Has Councillor Matthews returned?
No, he hasn't.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Morn. Councillor Alexander Bourne.
4.
Councillor Sarah Parkin.
4.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
4.
Councillor Linda Wotton.
4.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
4.
And Mrs. Megan Machin.
4.
Oh, I missed out Councillor Ray Wotton.
No, you didn't. 4. 4.
4. Okay, thank you very much. So that's unanimous from those members that are present, Chairman. 9 members for.
Thank you very much. Now, before we move on to the next item, I'm aware that Councillor David Brailsford has joined us, and obviously he wasn't at the beginning of the meeting to give any remarks on behalf of the Executive Council. David, would you like to make any comments at this stage before we move on to the next item?
Good morning. Yes, I'm afraid I'm programmed in for these meetings to start at 10:30, so apologies for being 20 odd minutes late. No, there's nothing from Councillor Bradwell that she wanted to say. I did speak to her yesterday and she told me that she'd got another function to attend, so obviously I attended it in her absence. I've listened to the meeting since I've been online. I found it very, very interesting. On the sustainable modes of transport, Rob, really looking forward to getting involved in that. And I think one of the roles that I would like to play is where members, local members, have a route that they think that might be worthy of some of this funding. I'd be gladly like to get involved and look at it. But I do think that members will appreciate that £450,000 is not going to solve all the problems. I take it as a beginning, and I very much hope that we can continue that going forward, not just for 3 years, as Mark pointed out, but for much longer than that. This is something that really I think we'd all like to spend more money on. I wouldn't just say that the £27 million, if we were to spend that on it instead of school transport, it would have a very negative impact on the scheduled bus services, because they do provide a lot of the transport for our children to get to school. But no, I've really enjoyed the meeting. I know that we'd all prefer to be in Lincoln rather than having a virtual meeting, but I do think it's worked very well so far, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Appreciate those comments. Now we can return to the agenda, and it's agenda item number 8. It is the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee work programme. This item sets out the committee's work programme for the rest of the year, 2020. And I'd like to invite Tracy Johnson, the Senior Scrutiny Officer, to present the report. Once again, as usual, if you'd like to speak, please type speak into the chat column and Councillor Moore will monitor this. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. I have no amendments to the work programme, and the planned items for the next 3 meetings are set out on pages 94 to 96. As previously requested, a report on elective home education has been added to the agenda for the meeting on the 20th of November. That is so that data can be included from the first term of school up to the end of October, so we can see what the impact of COVID-19 has had on those figures. The next meeting will be held on the 4th of September, and we're anticipating that meeting will also be virtual. And it's also possible that the meetings on the 9th of October and 20th of November might also be virtual, obviously depending on current guidance and advice at the time. That's it. Thank you, Chairman. I'll take questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Councillor Moore, do we have any members who wish to ask a question?
Thanks, Chairman. No members have indicated that they wish to speak.
Thank you very much. We have no questions, therefore. So the committee, just to summarise, is asked to firstly review and agree the committee's work programme as set out in the report, and secondly to highlight for discussion any additional scrutiny activity which could be considered for inclusion in the work programme. Can I ask that the proposed actions be approved? Does anyone dissent? We're going to do it the other way around this time. If you dissent, if you'd indicate, rather than everyone going through the process of saying that they support it. No dissension? That's the work programme agreed. Right, we move on to the next item, and this is items 9 and 10 on the agenda. Both contain exempt information, and we now need to vote on whether we go into private session. I therefore propose the following motion: that under Section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following 2 items of business, on the grounds it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. Do I have a second, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Morn. We will now vote on it in the usual format, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with now, as to whether we support the motion to exclude the press and public for the remainder of this meeting. Trina, will you once again read out the name of each member alphabetically? And again, we're asked to state whether we're for, against, or abstain. So over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, starting with Councillor Matt Bowles.
For.
So Mrs. Wendy Bowkett.
For.
Mr. Rob Fuchs.
For.
Councillor Rob Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Alexander Morn.
For.
Councillor Sarah Parkin.
For.
Mark Whittington.
For.
Councillor Linda Wotton.
For.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
For.
And Mrs. Megan Machin.
For.
So that's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Trina. That's all agreed. We will now adjourn for 10 minutes while we wait for the confirmation that the public link has been terminated, and also to allow time for a comfort break, which I'm sure will be welcome to get coffee. Please ensure that your microphone and camera are both switched off, and members of the press and public are able to contact the communications team after this meeting if they wish to find out what was agreed on these items. So it is now 11:43. We'll break for 10 minutes. Thank you very much.